Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. You know, it's been a long time since I've done a gun review on this channel, and with good reason. For one thing, as I've said, I make videos about anything that interests me, and frankly, I'm usually more interested in coming up with my own ideas and building prototypes of my own ideas rather than talking about things that other people have already developed. That said, obviously, there are whole YouTube channels and a lot of other internet media devoted to various kinds of product reviews. And, you know, some of those are sponsored reviews where the reviewer receives the product through some kind of a promotional program, and then they typically will try to give a very positive review or present the product in a very positive light. Not to say that there isn't still sometimes useful information in those reviews, but they certainly can't be considered unbiased. Others are independent reviews where the reviewer paid full price for the product and therefore is in a better position to render an objective assessment of its quality and so forth. But what they both have in common is that they're typically reviews of brand new products. You know, they obtain the new product, they examine it, they maybe do some tests on it, and they present their findings, and basically they're giving you their first impressions. And certainly there's value in that, but it's also somewhat of a limited perspective that affords. And so, for the few firearms that I have enough experience with to render more of a long-term perspective, I think it's useful for me to present my review of them so that that information is available. And in most cases, this will constitute more of a historical review than a commercial review. You know, it may not be of any use to someone who's shopping for guns, because by the time I get around to reviewing something, the specific make and model that I'm talking about probably has changed or is no longer in production or whatever the case may be. But I think relating my experiences with it is still good information to have out there for historical perspective. And so today I want to talk specifically about my Armalite M15A4TN. This was the first AR-15 type rifle that I ever acquired, and over the years I've put many thousands of rounds of ammunition through it. I've carried it around a lot, I've used it for a lot of things, and so it's definitely a gun that I'm in a position to talk about my experiences with. So that's what we're doing today. Now, as I said, this is an Armalite M15A4TN. Now, the M15 just means it's an AR platform. For whatever reason, at that time, Armalite was calling their AR-15s M15s. I've heard people speculate that, well, the M16 is a military rifle that's kind of on the same platform as this, except it has the full auto fire control group, or rather the select fire fire control group. So I've heard people speculate that maybe the M15 was the military designation for a semi-auto only rifle like this. That sounds plausible to me, but I've never looked into it to see whether the M15 was actually a legitimate military designation for something like this. In any case, for whatever reason, Armalite was calling this an M15, just to designate a semi-automatic 223 in this platform. The A4 designation just denotes a flat-topped upper receiver for ease of mounting optics, you know, as opposed to an upper receiver with an integral carry handle. The T designates this as a target model, so it has a heavy stainless barrel with no extraneous muzzle furniture and a recessed target crown. And then the N denotes a 20-inch barrel length. So that's the specific model of AR-15 that this is. However, as I said, this was also my first AR-15 type rifle, So, of the experiences that I'm going to relate, some of them are specific to this make and model of rifle, perhaps in contrast to some of the other AR-15s that are out there, while a lot of my experiences are probably common to most AR-type rifles. Now, this may have been my first AR-15, but it certainly was not my first rifle. Prior to acquiring this, I had plenty of experience already shooting a Marlin Model 60 and some other traditional style of rifles and shotguns. And the transition to shooting an AR-type rifle was a surprisingly steep learning curve. The main reason for that being the distance between the axis of the bore and your line of sight. On a traditional rifle, like a Marlin Model 60, the sights are sitting right on top of the barrel is right on top of the gun, and the stock curves back or curves down in the back so that you can get your eye behind the sights and look down the sights right on top of the barrel. And so the distance between your line of sight and the axis of the bore is probably less than an inch. Whereas on an AR, the distance between the axis of the bore and your line of sight is several inches. And this makes a big difference in terms of how much your apparent point of impact changes with distance. At least out to a certain point. As the distances become longer and longer, the angles involved become smaller and smaller, and so the difference becomes less significant. Consequently, if I do say so myself, I've made some pretty impressive shots with this gun at ranges or distances ranging from 50 yards to 500 yards. However, I've also made some really embarrassing misses with this rifle at distances from, say, 25 yards into just 5 or 10 feet. Because, if I have this sighted in for shooting at long range, then if there's a rabbit standing 5 feet in front of me, I can line the crosshairs up perfectly, either on the rabbit's head or on center of mass, and fire a shot and completely miss the rabbit. Because the point of impact, at least from the perspective of the line of sight that I have, has shifted that much because of the distance between the line of sight and the axis of the bore. Now, getting past the learning curve, though, this rifle has served me well. Really, anytime I need dependable firepower, whether it's to repel an attack by a marauding horde of jackrabbits or whatever the case may be, this tends to be my go-to firearm. As far as accuracy, if I recall correctly, there was something in the user manual, or maybe Armalite's catalog, to the effect that they guaranteed this gun to shoot sub-minute of angle groups. Of course, in the fine print, they said something about using high-quality ammunition. And that turns out to be a very significant factor, because if I load this with, your cheap steel case imported Russian ammo, group size at 100 yards is more like 4 to 6 inches. If I load it with run-of-the-mill brass case domestic ammo, group size is typically 2 to 3 inches. About the best, or at least the most accurate factory ammo that I've found is this Ultramax remanufactured ammo. It seemed like that was shooting about 1 1/4, 1.5 inch groups. The Fiocchi, however you want to pronounce that, was doing almost as well as the Ultramax. And the thing I really like about that is that the cases are very consistent. They're very good for hand loading, which, of course, ultimately I would work up some premium hand loads for this gun. Got separate videos on that. And then those premium hand loads finally allowed me to realize the sub-minute of angle accuracy that the rifle itself is capable of. So it's interesting to note that with a rifle like this, the limiting factor on accuracy quickly becomes the ammunition rather than the gun that it's fired from. Now, while ammunition may be a limiting factor on accuracy, I've had very few ammunition-related malfunctions with this gun. It seems to cycle reliably with pretty much everything that I've put through it. Of course, with just about any factory ammo, you will get the occasional dud round that just fails to fire and has to be manually cycled, but you know, that's not really a big deal. Occasionally I have also had case head separations with, you know, general factory ammo. Interesting thing about that is that on the few occasions when I've had case head separation, the rifle would cycle, it would eject the broken case head, then it would try to feed the next round, and it would jam that round into the chamber. Of course, it wouldn't chamber all the way because of the partial case that's still left in the chamber. But then the dimensions of the cases are such that the next round trying to feed into the chamber would form sort of a taper fit with the remnant of the round that was in the chamber. And so, you know, when I saw that it hadn't gone all the way into battery and I manually cycled it to try and clear the malfunction, the next round would actually pull out the broken case and eject it, and then it would feed the next round and continue functioning. So, you know, case head separation, which in some cases can be a very serious or a very difficult malfunction to clear, the few times that I've had it happen was actually extremely easy to clear, in this case, at least for such a potentially serious malfunction. Aside from that, I think the only ammunition-related malfunction that I've had was once when I was hand-loading some shells. Either I didn't trim the cases enough, or I just set the crimping die down a little too far. And so when I was crimping the shell, it was actually deforming the shoulder of the cartridge. You know, pushing the neck down so that the shoulder bowed out a little bit, and now because the shoulder diameter is larger than the chamber diameter, that ammunition obviously would not chamber all the way, and so it wouldn't feed or cycle. After that episode, I've been a little more careful about the crimping. In fact, with a lot of the 223 ammo that I load for this now, I don't even crimp the ammunition at all, and then that eliminates the possibility of that problem recurring. But depending on what bullets you're using and what you're loading them for, you may or may not need a crimp for that application. I guess the other thing that can affect reliability is magazines. I've run a variety of cheap generic brand magazines in this gun, and most of them have worked perfectly reliably. The one exception was once I picked up a pair of National Magazine brand magazines, and both of those basically were junk. They wouldn't feed reliably from either of them. So those were a problem. Once I picked up a pair of original 20-round Colt magazines, and, you know, so used, relatively old magazines, and one of them worked flawlessly, the other one gave feeding problems, kind of like the National Magazine magazines. So I'm not sure if that was just a worn-out spring or what, but those are the only magazines that I've ever had give me problems. Pretty much all the others that I've tried have worked fine. I've tried the aluminum ones, a few of the polymer ones. I really like these Israeli-made Elander steel magazines. They're just a little bit heavier than your aluminum magazines, but they just seem a little bit sturdier, and they've certainly worked reliably for me in the time that I've had them. Of course, the AR-15 is the most accessorized rifle in history, And so you can't really talk about any specific AR-15 without talking about the accessories that you've decked it out with. And so I should probably take a minute to discuss what I've put on this thing, some of the modifications I've made, and the reasoning behind them. The bipod, pretty simple, standard accessory, but also a very useful one in order to be able to take precise long shots. The sling, again, a pretty much standard 2-point sling. Nowadays, I get the impression that you really have a lot of options in terms of tactical slings. That really wasn't the case back when I was putting this rifle together, or back when I picked it up and was needing a sling for it. At that time, if you went to the local sporting goods store and looked for rifle slings, they pretty much only had one length of sling, and it was just designed for holding a rifle across your back. So I picked up a standard 2-point sling, and then I put this extension strap on it so that I could wear it across my front and have something that was a little bit more tactically efficient. But I'm sure there's probably better options than that out nowadays if I was to go shopping for them. But I've got this and it still works, so nothing too fancy about the sling. The scope that I've got on here is a Leupold Mark IV 40mm objective lens by 3:9 power magnification. I got this scope on a really good sale. It was like 65% off. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford it. But it has been a really nice and dependable scope for this rifle. You know, I think the 3:9 power is about right for a general purpose rifle like this, because, you know, normally when you go to take a shot, you want to, you know, bring the rifle up on target, hold it steady, and take the shot. So if you have excessive magnification and you're trying to shoot from, you know, an offhand position or something that's not exceptionally stable, then what can happen is you'll bring the rifle up on target, and then because you can see the crosshairs wiggling on the target, you'll be hesitant to take the shot. And so you really don't want excessive magnification in a gun that will at least sometimes be used from a standing position. And so that's where, you know, 3 to 4 power is about right for that. Any more than 4 or 5 starts to get counterproductive if you're going to be shooting from a standing or an offhand position. On the other hand, you know, if I do have time to deploy the bipod and assume a, you know, more stable position, you know, that's where being able to turn it up to 9 power really has advantages in terms of letting me see the target better and, you know, get more precise with my shot placement. Any more than 9 power probably is not necessary within the effective range of the 223 cartridge. I've also accessorized the scope itself a little bit with these so-called blizzard caps. It seemed like these were really cheap, like just a couple of dollars. And yet, for as cheap as they were, they've worked out really well. Of course, you know, this is just a rubber ring that fits around the objective and eyepiece lenses of the scope, and then I can flip them open. You know, if I want to look through the scope with its normal lenses and have maximum optical clarity, you know, if I snap them into place, then they provide a lens cap to protect the scope, and yet the lens cap is made of clear polycarbonate, so if I need to take a quick shot and I'm not as concerned about optical clarity, you know, I can look directly through the caps and take the shot anyway. Now, one thing about the AR-15 platform is that the receiver is made in 2 parts, the upper and the lower, which are just held together by a pair of pins. And so typically you'll get a little bit of wobble between the upper and lower receivers. And that really doesn't have any mechanical effect on accuracy or performance because your barrel, your bolt, your optic are all part of the upper receiver assembly, or all rigidly connected to the upper receiver assembly. And so, you know, there's not going to be any play like between your scope and your barrel, for example. That said, it can have perhaps a psychological effect on accuracy, because if the gun feels sloppy, you may expect it to shoot sloppy, and that may induce you to shoot more sloppily. So there's a lot of products on the market that are aimed at reducing or eliminating the wobble between AR-15 upper and lower receivers. I tried a few of them. You know, I tried the rubber wedges, and that didn't work at all. Seemed like the things never fit correctly. I had to sort of whittle them down until they would kind of finally fit, and then every time I separated the upper and lower for cleaning or whatever, the wedge would fall out and get lost on the carpet. And so, yeah, those little rubber wedges that they market for that purpose are absolute garbage. Then a lot of the products that are marketed for that purpose involve expanding pins that require like an Allen key or some sort of tool to, you know, expand the pins and eliminate the slop. But, you know, now you need special tools to disassemble your gun for cleaning, which to me was an unacceptable loss of functionality. So I never tried going that route. What I did end up doing, though, was actually just epoxy bedding the rear lug of the upper into the lower receiver. So let me actually separate the receivers here so I can show you that. So, this normally would just be a cutout, but as you can see, I put a little piece of sheet metal that I just glued in there to act as kind of a dam, and then that provided me with a cavity, or a retained area that I could fill with epoxy bedding compound, and then, you know, assemble it with the lug and bed the rear lug of the upper receiver into the lower receiver. And then, because you've got that perfect fit between the mating surfaces on the upper and lower, at least at the rear lug, that pretty much completely eliminated, you know, any noticeable play or wobble between the two, and it did so without sacrificing any functionality. So as far as I'm concerned, this is probably the definitive way to eliminate the wobble. The one possible unintended consequence of this that I can see is that if I wanted to swap out uppers, if I wanted to put a different upper receiver on this lower receiver, that might be a problem, because this one is bedded specifically for that upper, and I'm not sure how much deviation in the dimensions of the rear lug there might be with a different upper. But in this particular case, I don't really plan on swapping uppers on this rifle, and so this wasn't really a problem. Again, the whole issue of you know, wobble between the upper and lower receivers is really just a, you know, cosmetic issue, but this is one definitive way to eliminate it if you so choose. Now, the final modification that I've made to this rifle is the addition of what I would call a tactical bolt catch, or tactical bolt release. The normal bolt release on an AR-15 is just this button here. So, you know, the bolt locks open on an empty magazine, and then to drop the bolt, you push the button. Now, that's fine if we're just demonstrating it administratively, but if you're actually trying to reload the gun and, you know, keep it more or less on target as you're reloading, as would be tactically correct, that's actually a little bit challenging, because, you know, okay, so let's say you know, you've shot your magazine dry, and so the bolt is locked open on an empty magazine. You know, you drop the magazine, you put a loaded magazine into the gun. Now you've got to hit the bolt release. You know, probably the easiest way to do it is, you know, as soon as you put the magazine in, just reach up and do it with your left hand. But if you do that, it means you're supporting the entire weight of the gun, which is very front heavy because I've got this heavy stainless target barrel, just with my right hand back here. I mean, this is not easy to hold the gun in this position. So that's not real ergonomic. Of course, the alternative would be to support the weight of the gun with my right hand, or excuse me, with my left hand where it is, and then reach over with my right hand to hit the button. And that supports the weight of the gun a little better, but this is still pretty awkward. If anything, even more awkward than just holding the weight with my right hand. So that got me wondering if there's a better design for the bolt release mechanism here. And what I realized is, you know, this bolt release, or bolt catch, is basically just a little lever that's pinned in place here. So pressing in on the top would be the same as pulling out on the bottom. So if I add a little lever that extends down to the left side of the trigger guard, then I can lock, if the bolt's locked open, I can just reach through the trigger guard with my trigger finger and push that button and drop the bolt. And that's a much easier and more ergonomic solution to the bolt catch design. So when I first hit upon this design, or came up with this idea, I realized this is so simple that somebody has to have already thought of it and already be making an aftermarket bolt release, you know, according to this design or something similar. So, you know, I spent several weeks actually searching every, you know, aftermarket AR-15 parts distributor on the internet trying to find something like this. And at the time, I came up completely empty-handed. It seemed like nobody made anything even remotely similar to it. So, of course, that meant I just had to build my own, which I did. Now, at the time, I was pretty busy with work and school. I was still in college at the time. And so it took me about a year to do the design and build the prototype, install it on the rifle, and test it to make sure that it worked the way I thought it would, which it, in fact, worked very well. But, like I say, it took me about a year to do all that. And right about at the end of that year, I took this gun to a shooting match locally, and no one noticed the bolt catch that I noticed. You know, I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't specifically show it to anyone. Nobody asked about it. But I was out in sort of a public venue with it for really the first time. You know, and then after the shooting match, I went on vacation for about 2 weeks. And when I got back from my vacation, I got to thinking, you know, that bolt catch really works well. It's a really good idea. It's a really simple product. I should patent that and make some money on it. And I started drafting a letter to a patent attorney. And then I thought, well, you know, I've been working on this for over a year now. It's very possible that somebody else has developed one in the meantime. So I should probably double check that before I spend too much time working on this letter. So I did another search of the internet, and this time I got lots of results. It turned out that 3 separate companies were now in the process of introducing this into the market. You know, at that time, none of them actually had it for sale yet, but there were 3 separate companies that all had issued press releases within the last 2 weeks, the time I'd been on vacation since that shooting competition that I took this to. You know, and in these press releases, they claimed they'd been developing this for a long time, which sounded a little suspicious to me because, you know, for me as a student who was able to work on this like 5 minutes a week, it took a year to develop. You know, for a company with full-time engineering staff, it would probably take 1 day to develop, if that. Now granted, even once you have a working prototype, it takes a long time to put anything into mass production, but none of these were actually in mass production yet. Anyway, bottom line is that the timing was really suspicious. I cannot prove that any of these companies somehow heard about this device from somebody that was at the shooting competition and, you know, rushed it into production. But the timing is really interesting, you know, so I don't know. Whatever the case may be, by the time I thought about patenting it, it was already out there, and so there was no point proceeding any further with that. I guess the good news for anyone out there who doesn't want to build their own is that now you can buy these as aftermarket parts, and for all I know, maybe they're coming standard on some of the commercial AR builds that are available now. I haven't really looked into that. As far as aftermarket parts, Magpul has what they call their battery assist device, which is basically this, you know, or the acronym is BAD, B-A-D, which would kind of fit if they did rip off my idea, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, now there are commercial versions of this available, although I can't say as I've ever actually tried out any of the commercial versions. I've been pretty satisfied with the prototype that I built years ago. So I think that about covers what I wanted to discuss as far as, you know, my experience with this gun and, you know, the modifications I've made to it and so forth. Like I said, it's been a very dependable rifle in everything from summer heat and blowing dust to, you know, sub-zero temperatures in winter and blowing snow. Of course, I usually finish up these gun review videos with some shooting footage, and we'll certainly try to do that today. I've used this gun in enough other videos already that I don't know if I really need to go out and shoot some more shooting footage, or whether I can just cannibalize video from existing videos for that portion. But in any case, we will finish out with some shooting footage. Hopefully you found this to be interesting perspective on this gun, and until next time, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show. Alright, so I set up some targets down at about 300 yards, and to make this a little bit more visual, I picked up a box of tracer ammunition, so let's see what we can do.